Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So moving on with L4. So this is equation with fractions, and I know that our first instinct with fractions is to be like, oh, I want to turn them into decimals, and I'm going to ask that you don't. Because what we're going to try to do is we're going to eliminate the denominator from the fraction so that it will make it much easier. So the first thing, if you have to do, change any mixed numbers to improper fractions. Okay, so a mixed number, I'm just going to write up at the top here, like a mixed number would be 3 1/2. So it has whole numbers and fractions in it. That's why we call it mixed. If you run into this situation, you want to make sure that you change it to an improper fraction before you do anything else. And just a reminder that we'd go 2 times 3 plus 1. That would, so 2 times 3 is 6, 6 plus 1 is 7, so that's 7, and we keep the denominator of 2. Okay, so this one is our mixed, and this one here is our improper. So we want to do everything with improper. You know how I feel about improper fractions. They're the way to go with everything. So we've done it in the past when we're dealing with just adding, subtracting fractions. Do it again when you're using algebra, whether it's a coefficient or a constant. So change it to an improper fraction. You only have to do that if it's needed, if you end up with a mixed in your equation. Okay. So to eliminate the denominator, multiply all terms by the denominator. Now in this case, the denominator is the same, 14 and 14. Both of those are nice and easy. So we multiply all terms by whatever the denominator is. So in this case, it's 14. So times this one by 14, times the h by 14, and times the 9 over 14. Now, remember that when we're multiplying fractions, we can write 14 as a fraction. It would just simply be 14 over 1. So when we're multiplying fractions, straight across the top, straight across the bottom. So that would be 14 over 14 plus 14h equals 9 times 14 is 126 over 14. Okay? So now we're going to simplify. So 14 over 14 is 1. 1 plus 14h, because there's no denominator on this term, so I don't have to simplify it. Sorry, I'm off the page. Maybe I'll zoom out a little bit. Make sure that's focused. Okay, and that's equal to 9. I'm going to show you another way that you can do this a little bit quicker, especially like 9 times 14 is hard to do in my head. I'd have to go to my calculator. I'm going to show you a way to simplify it a little bit easier, but I just want to go through this way first because I think this is the way it's going to make most sense to those of us just starting. Okay, so now this is just a two-step algebra question. This is easy peasy. I want to isolate the variable. So when we talk about isolating the variable, that means getting h by itself. So I'm going to use that language a lot. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So I'm going to have 14h equals 8. And then I want to get h by itself, so I'm going to divide by 14, divide by 14. So h is equal to 8 over 14. But here's the deal. Is you always want to simplify the fraction. Now 8, obviously, we can't, this is not going to be a whole number. So we're going to simplify this fraction. So I'm going to divide the numerator and the denominator by 2, and h is equal to 2/7. That's the answer I'm looking for. 8/14 isn't fully simplified. So if you give me this as an answer, you're going to lose a half mark deduction. But it's better than losing all your marks. So just remember to simplify when you have a chance. Now I said that I was going to show you a different way to do it so you wouldn't have to multiply so much. So I'm just gonna, I've got a white piece of paper here. So I'm gonna grab a marker. And so the equation was 1 over 14 plus h equals 9 over 14. That was the equation. So again, I multiply everything by 14. Still the same steps, like the steps don't change. This is just a different way to simplify. I know without doing the multiplication, I know I can multiply. I've proven that to you before. but I know that 14 divided by 14, 14 divided by itself is 1. So 1 times 1 leaves me with just 1. And this would be 14h, because there's no denominator on the second term. And here, 14 divided by 14 is going to give me 1 again. 1 times 9 is 9. I'm just going to pop this right back over. And you see that that's that line right there. So instead of actually reaching for my calculator, I can simplify. And we did this before in our add and subtract. It's simplifying within a fraction. I know you guys weren't super comfortable with it then. You may have gotten comfortable with it since. So whatever way works for you. If you want to simplify this way and you say, oh, sometimes we use the language, these cancel each other out. What we really mean is they divide into each other, leaving us with 1. And 9 times 1 gives us the 9. We use the language canceling out, but really what we're saying, they divide into each other and leave us with 1. So sometimes you'll see when I'm doing the math, I'll simplify really quick, and then I don't have to go to my calculator and times 9 by 14. So that might be helpful for you down the road. The way I'm going to do these notes is I'm going to do it the little bit longer way. And the reason why is because I think that makes the most sense to you guys. But if you go ahead and simplify, that's fine too. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the denominators. So the denominators here are 8. So I'm going to multiply every term by 8. So 8, and the m gets times by 8. So if you're rushing through this, it's really easy to miss. It's really easy to miss multiply by 8, especially those terms that don't have denominators. That I find sometimes I do, and I skip it, and therefore my answer would be wrong. So again, this is like 8 over 1, so 8 times 3 is 24, and 1 times 8 is 8. You see I didn't do that over here, I just did it in my head because I know that this is a numerator, and I'm just going to times those two together and put it over the denominator. So I'm going to simplify now, so that's 3 plus 8m equals 1. I want to go ahead and isolate that variable, so I'm going to subtract 3, so 8m equals a negative 2. I'm going to divide by 8. I'm just going to move this over here. So m is equal to a negative 2 over 8, but that can be simplified. So m, I'm going to take, when I say take 2, I'm going to divide 2 out of the numerator and the denominator. So I'm going to have a negative 1 over 4. And that's my answer there. So a couple of people have asked in the past, how do I know where to start? So the whole thing is we're trying to get m, the variable, by itself. So I know that the first move I've got to make is I got to go up that bedmiss ladder. So I'm going to start at the add subtract. So that's why I start here. Could I have divided everything by 8? Yes, but then I would have had 3/8 and a 1/8, and then I would have been subtracting those. And I guess you could totally do it that way too, but you'd have to remember to divide every term by 8. I find it easier to get my constants together first and then divide by that 8 only once. So those are some things that you might want to keep in mind. I'm going to switch to a different color here. So on this example, I only have one denominator in this one, and it's a 9. So I'm going to times every term by 9. All right. I don't know if I like that orange. We'll go with it for a little while. You can yell at me later that this one was hard to see. So 9 times 5 is 45 over 9. Y minus 18 equals 72. Oof, no, too light. I'm switching pens. Sorry, guys. So I'm going to simplify. This is the only fraction I have to simplify. So it's going to be 5y minus 18 equals 72. I said 72, but I wrote 75. So I'm going to add 18 to each side. All right, so I get 5y equals 90. That's nice. Divide by 5, divide by 5. So y is equal to, my screen went a little dark there, sorry. I think it's 16, but I better double check. I don't have you guys in the room with me, so that makes me sad. 90 divided by 5 is 18. It's a good thing I checked. I thought it was 16. And so that's nice. It doesn't even turn out to be a fraction. It turns out to be a whole number. That always makes us feel better when that happens. But fractions are perfectly fine. So I don't want you turning fractions into decimals. That defeats the purpose of working with fractions. As we move forward in our math in 9, 10, 11, and 12, we have to get used to seeing those fractions. Okay, this one's super different. This one, when I look at it, my denominator is x. So no big deal, we're still gonna follow the same steps. So here my denominator was 9, and I timesed everything by 9. Here my denominator is x, so I'm gonna times everything by x. And so it's nice that we've done the polynomial unit first, so that you know how to deal with multiplying constants and monomials and things like that. We know that when we divide variables, we subtract the exponents. So this would be an invisible exponent of 1, an invisible exponent of 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. So this is just going to leave us with 12. And we also know that anything divided by itself is 1. 1 times 12 is 12. Minus 2x equals 4x. Okay? Again, I want to isolate the variable, but I have two variables this time. So this is the same sort of thing that we did in earlier lessons. I want to combine those variables together. So I'm going to move this 2 to the right-hand side. So I'm left with 12 on the left-hand side and 6x on the right-hand side. Divide by 6, divide by 6, x is equal to 2. And again, that worked out really nicely. So although it was weird having an x as a denominator, it's really no big deal. You just treat it exactly the same way as if it were a number. Nice and easy. Okay, so this one, when we look at the denominators are 12, 12, and 3. So what we're looking for is the number that 12 and 3 divide evenly into. So I have a number, and divided by 12, it's going to give me a whole number. If I take that number and I divide it by 3, it's going to give me a whole number. Lowest common multiple. If you use not the lowest common multiple, that's not the end of the world. So the lowest common multiple here is actually 12, because 12 divided by 12 gives me 1, and 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. So that works out nicely. So I'm going to times everything by 12. So I'm going to have 12x over 12 minus 60 over 12 equals, ooh, there's a negative there, negative 24 over 3. So notice my denominators didn't change, but my numerators were multiplied by 12. All right, so now we're going to simplify. So this is going to be 1x, but I don't normally write the 1, so I'm just going to leave x. If you wrote the 1, that is fine. And this would be negative 8. And so again, just a one-step equation here. Easy peasy, add 5, x is equal to a negative 3. So as you can see, as long as you follow the rules, the lowest common multiple thing is kind of new. Sometimes the number will already be there. Sometimes you'll have to do a combination of multiplying these together to get it. Your answers can be fractions, they can be whole numbers, but if they're a fraction, please remember to reduce it. There's a few more examples on the other page, so I'm just going to move that off to the side. All right. Okay, so this is a good example. We have 3 different denominators now, so 3, 12, and 6, but we know that the lowest common multiple is 12 again for this one, because 12 divided by 3 gives me a whole number, 12 divided by 12 gives me a whole number of 1, and 12 divided by 6 gives me a whole number of 2. So that works out really well. So I'm going to times everything by 12. So all the numerators get times by 12. So I'm going to have negative 12 over 3x minus 60 over 12 equals 12 over 6. So now I'm going to simplify. So I'm going to have negative 4x minus 5 equals 2. Okay, basic equation. We're going to isolate that variable. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I'm going to have negative 4x equals 7. I want to get x by itself, so I'm going to divide by the negative 4, divide by negative 4. So x is equal to a negative 7 over 4. Now what you see is I switched the negative from the bottom to the top in my answer. It really doesn't matter. It can go either on the numerator or the denominator. And most times you'll see me write it like this when it's in a question. It's just indicating that that answer is negative. So either of these answers is good. I'm going to leave it as an improper fraction. I can't reduce it. So I'm content with that one. Okay, so this one over here is again a little bit different. It's your distribution from lesson 3 and fractions. Holy smokes. So we're going to multiply this in. We're going to multiply this in. So we're leapfrogging it just like we did in the polynomial unit. So this is going to be 3x over 4, because remember that's like saying x over 1 and 2 over 1. So 3 times x gives me 3x, 4 times 1 gives me 4, plus 3 times 2 gives me 6, 4 times 1 gives me 4, and that's equal to 7/8. So that's a little bit easier to see. Now we look for the lowest common multiple. So we have 4, 4, and 8. So that's going to be 8. You don't need to state this, but I find it's helpful just to kind of get your head. I think about it, I've thought about it, I know what to multiply by. So I always like to write it down. I find that it's helpful. You may find that it's not helpful, and that's okay. So we've got 24x over 4 plus 48 over 4 equals 56 over 8. Okay, so we're going to reduce these, so that's going to be 6x plus 12 equals 7. So again, just a two-step equation. As soon as you eliminate that denominator, all of a sudden this is so much easier to solve. And you can use this strategy all the time. So we are going to subtract 12 from both sides. So I'm going to have 6x equals a negative 5. Divide by 6. Divide by 6, my answer is x equals a negative 5/6. Now, I will let you know that on your hand-in assignment, and as you do the practice assignments, on the hand-in, you need to show me all your math. On the practice, I really encourage you to do all your math steps. I know it seems like a lot of work, but it really will pay off. And you'll get faster at doing it. Okay, last example. All right. So my denominators are 2 and 4. I'm just going to switch colors here. 2 and 4. So I know that my lowest common multiple is 4. Nice and easy. So I'm going to multiply all my terms, even the ones without denominators, get multiplied by the lowest common multiple. So I'm going to have 4 over 2x plus 8 equals 12 over 4 minus 28. All right, I'm going to simplify. So I've got 2x plus 8 equals, oh, I lost an x. There should be an x there. 3x minus 28. Okay, so this is a three-step equation. Again, no big deal. We've already done those. So it's nice, like once they're done, they're easy to do. So I'm going to bring my 3 to the left-hand side, or my 3x, sorry. So minus 3x from both sides. So I'm going to be left with a negative 1x plus 8 equals a negative 28. I wrote a negative 1. You could just write negative x if you wanted. You don't have to put the 1. In this case, I like to put the 1 because it reminds me that it's a coefficient of negative 1, and I'm going to end up having to divide that out. So I'm going to minus 8 from both sides. So I have negative 1x equals negative 36. Divide by that negative 1, divide by the negative 1, so x is equal to a positive 36. So like I said, that negative 1 in front, usually I don't write it if it's a positive 1, but if it's a negative 1, I will write it. So I really encourage you to practice these. The fraction ones are probably the toughest just because we don't like dealing with fractions, but if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.